The effects and uses of the mass media. This is page 283 in our textbook. Okay, so last time we looked at stratification to do with mass media, but now we're going to look at what the mass media actually does. So most of the theories of the mass media examined so far have been concerned with its content, only implicitly looking at the question of the extent to which readers, viewers and listeners of the media are influenced. In this section we consider research into attitude formation and reinforcement, looking historically at how theories have developed as new forms of the mass media have emerged. This is the hypodermic syringe model. The earliest model of the effects of the mass media on audiences is known as the hypodermic syringe model, so called because it assumes that the media has the power to inject its message into the audience with the force of a hypodermic syringe. If someone is exposed to a mass media message, it will be so powerful that it will cause them to behave in the way the mass media dictates, effectively controlling their behaviour. In the 1930s, the Nazis' use of cinema and radio, orchestrated by the propaganda minister Joseph Goebbels, was widely thought to be responsible for Hitler's hold over the German people. In this same decade, Orson Welles' The War of the Worlds radio broadcast fooled panic-stricken Americans into thinking that Martians had invaded, giving further credence to the hypodermic syringe model. Okay, so this is the idea that people hear these things through the media and it becomes their opinion or their belief. Yes, we know that Hitler was a mastermind at the things that he did, but he had a propaganda minister. But you also have to account for the fact that he was an extremely charismatic leader. However, using the media as a form of manipulating people's minds was actually a very forward-thinking thing to do. And he used big adverts and used the radio really effectively and had his speeches broadcast. Okay, the thing about the War of the Worlds, well, not everybody heard the start of the broadcast and came in partway through and thought that they were listening to a proper news broadcast because they trusted the news broadcast. They thought that America had been invaded by aliens. I maybe shouldn't make any comment about intelligence and Americans at this point. So, a similar view can also be found in a number of studies of film and television violence conducted by a range of researchers. Bandura's well-known work with children and filmed violence on Bobo dolls claimed that children would imitate the violence they had witnessed through mediated images. William Belson's study of 1,565 boys in London found that high exposure to television violence increases the degree to which boys engage in serious violence, and recommended that steps should be taken as soon as possible to achieve a substantial reduction in the total amount of violence being presented on television. Okay, now, there are two ways of looking at this. Some people think that by watching lots of violence you become violent yourself. Others think that by watching it you become sanitized to it, and therefore you don't even think of it as being violent anymore. So it could have the opposite effect on you, if you like. So the assumption that the media are able to determine attitudes and decisively affect behaviour is also implicit in the practice of censorship, advertising, where the promotion of items such as tobacco and alcohol are tightly controlled, as well as areas of politics such as voting behaviours, where the political directives of newspapers have been seen as decisive to the result of general elections. It is also strongly implicit in the mass manipulative model, where it is suggested that the ruling class not only intends to control the minds and behaviour of the proletariat, it also succeeds. Okay, so the very fact that they don't advertise cigarettes on TV suggests how strongly TV influences people to buy cigarettes. Of course, we all know that despite the fact that there are no TV adverts for cigarettes, people still buy them and smoke them. So what's influencing them to do that now? So we have to keep questioning this theory as to the influence of the mass media. All subsequent theories of media effects are to some extent critiques of the hypodermic syringe model, but criticisms specific to this model have also been made. Much of the work of researchers such as Bandura and Belson has been seen as methodologically suspect, particularly the use of experimental and laboratory methods. The assumption that people's minds are a blank sheet or tabula rasa until the media come to write indelibly on it has also been seen as simplistic. Prior socialization is not taken into account. The hypodermic syringe model assumes that people will interpret the same message in the same way as an undifferentiated mass. In claiming a direct causal relationship with subsequent behaviour, it is also claiming that people will respond immediately to external stimuli, discounting the possibility of longer-term media effects. Okay, so the other models that we're going to look at are all critics of the hypodermic syringe model, which is why I'm trying not to say too much about it, because otherwise I'm going to tell you everything that's coming up in the next bit as well. You know, there was a problem in that the research that was done supporting this was done sort of within a laboratory and was done in an experimental way. Therefore, you have the whole idea of people behaving differently because they're in different surroundings. So is it therefore a good piece of research? Is it valid? Is it reliable? Because of the other influences that are on people. And, you know, okay, so the media may affect us to do something, but there are lots of other things that could be influencing us as well. The media isn't the only thing that has an effect on people. So nevertheless, recent research has been unwilling to dismiss this model entirely. Writing about his research into the miners' strike of 1984, for example, Greg Philo writes, "The earliest mass communication researchers saw media power as akin to a hypodermic needle injecting society with ideologies and propaganda. Later, it became apparent that audiences bring much of their own culture and history to their understanding of media messages. Our own research shows that at least some of the information which is used when these audiences think about the world is itself provided by television and the press. It is also clear that it can be very difficult to criticise a dominant media account if there is little access to alternative sources of information. In these circumstances, we should not underestimate the power of the media. In other words, in certain circumstances, some credence must be given to the claims of the hypodermic syringe model when people have very little opportunity to consider another point of view." Okay? If people only read one-sided opinions from a newspaper, then obviously that is going to become their opinion. And I have to say that there are certain members of my family who will spout things off at me, and I think, where have you got that from? You know, they'll then tell me, oh, well, you know, I read it in the Sun newspaper. I don't particularly trust what's in the Sun newspaper, but because that's the only form of media that person reads, they won't watch the news on TV, they won't, you know, any other sorts of media like that, then of course that becomes their opinion. So you have to kind of think these things through fairly carefully. And the media can have a big effect on people. We're not saying that it doesn't, but there are other theories about the effects that it has. So this is the normative or two-step flow model. The normative model, also known as the two-step flow model, chronologically follows the hypodermic syringe model, though its conclusions are very different. It is mostly associated with the work of Robert Merton, Elihu Katz and Paul Lazarsfeld, and became influential enough to hold sway in the 3 decades following the Second World War. Lazarsfield's research into the US presidential election of 1940 found that the mass media's impact on voting behaviour was minimal, with half of all voters making up their minds about who to vote for, and many months before polling day. Those who did change their minds did so because of the influence of the people in their immediate social circle. His subsequent work with Katz argued that an individual's personal beliefs and attitudes are mainly formed within social groups, families, friends and colleagues. In other words, by the agents of primary and secondary socialization. If the mass media has a role at all, it is to influence the opinion leaders within these groups. The 2 steps of the 2-step flow model are therefore from radio and print to opinion leaders, and from them to the less active sections of the population. Though the opinion leaders cited many more sources than the mass media as influencing their decisions, it was nevertheless the case that the opinion leaders exposed themselves more to the media than the people they influenced, though they still saw the media as only one of a range of influences on them. Although the 2-step flow model was useful in redirecting research into media effects away from a too simplistic hypodermic syringe model, it has also been seen as lacking sophistication. For example, by dividing the audience into 2 categories of active and passive, as well as failing to state why there are only 2 steps in the flow model, when there is no reason why there could not be many more. It also assumes that power and influence only exist between individuals and groups, ignoring the power of large social institutions such as the state and big business. Okay, so there's the theory and there's the criticisms of it. But you can see this is a 2-step process. So rather than the media going directly to a person, it comes through somebody else who is maybe charismatic, who has influence over them, and it's then fed to them through that person. So it's a 2-step process. I think it's fairly obvious from looking at it. Okay. Now, although it's being criticised here and saying, look, it doesn't look at bigger institutions, you know, if it's a 2-step model, then you could apply it to anything. Just because they talk about individuals and groups, it doesn't mean it couldn't be applied elsewhere. Okay. Uses and gratifications model. The uses and gratification model reverses the question about the effects of the mass media on people and instead asks how people use the mass media. Looked at in this way, the gratifications given by the mass media are less obvious than simply providing information or entertainment. Okay, so now we're moving away from what are the effects and we're actually looking at what are the uses. Okay. For lull, the mass media are used for a wide variety of purposes. They may be used for companionship or background noise, to regulate time, to denote status and provide role models, to allow people to join in with group conversation, to facilitate family occasions or help create or maintain relationships, as well as to promote social learning, for example, through the transmission of values. Okay, so lull is looking at the various things that people get from social media, mass media, sorry. I have to be honest, one of the first things I do when I walk into my home is to switch on either the radio or switch on the TV. I like there to be a background noise going on whilst I'm doing other things. So this could be one of the uses. Okay, and he talks about all sorts of other things. Obviously, I talk to you about Coronation Street quite a lot. It is something that I would talk about with other people. Characters, how I get upset if something happens to certain characters. All those sorts of things. It becomes a topic of conversation. So to this list, according to McQuail, can be added uses such as escaping from routine or joining in imaginary communities, such as those of soap operas like EastEnders and Coronation Street. They can also give a sense of personal identity if we see ourselves, for example, as the kind of person who reads the Times or listens to Radio 1. It also has a major use in allowing people to understand what is happening in the world around them, satisfying the need to keep abreast of events. Okay, so Macquarie is just adding extra things of the uses that are there, all fairly obvious. But the list of other possible uses and gratifications found in the mass media could potentially be very long, and would show different uses by different groups such as men and women, is testimony to the value of this approach in examining the impact of the mass media. However, research in this field has overemphasised the extent to which activities such as watching television are planned or structured, and the extent to which individuals rather than groups engage with the mass media. The fundamental assumption that people use the mass media to meet needs fails to answer the question of why those needs exist in the first place, or what the mass media's role may have been in creating needs and shaping desires. Okay, people didn't sit down in front of the TV 100 years ago, so what did they do instead? Has the media then created these needs that people have? The fact now that we can record things, we can rewind TV, we can do all sorts of things with our televisions nowadays, also makes a difference. So here, whilst they're saying maybe it's not planned that everyone sits down and watches a programme together, with being able to record and watch whenever you want, then yes, you can all sit down together and make those decisions. It doesn't have to affect anything else that you're doing. This is changing over time with technology and whatever. But there's also this traditional thing of the family sitting down. In the UK we have Saturday night television, which is supposed to be family entertainment because it's what the family all sit down together to do. There we go. It also has little to say about the dysfunctional nature of the media, for example, in the way that a desire to discover what is happening in society through the media may lead to the view that there are high crime levels, and this could discourage people from leaving the house. Similarly, the postmodernist view expressed by Baudrillard argues that, although the audience may interact with the media, they are now so caught up in its world, the simulacra, that they are unable or uninterested in acting in their own real world. Okay, so here we are with Baudrillard again, the difference between the real and the hyper-real. And what he's saying is, people are so caught up in what they're seeing on TV that they forget to go and interact with real people. These become real people to them. And, as we've moved more into reality TV, we feel like we actually know these people. I read a lot of biographies, and I just read a bit in the Jonathan Ross autobiography, where he's talking about the fact that it's actually quite strange when you meet people and they feel like they know you because they see you in their living room on a regular basis, and they know the kinds of things you like and your sense of humour and those types of things. So those things start to become more real, and it is a malaise of the society that we live in now, that people tend to talk to people through social networks rather than actually talking to the person. So this is the development that Baudrillard seemed to be pointing to when he put forward the postmodernist view.